The quiet panic. You know that feeling when something's just off? Like when you walk into a room and everyone suddenly stops talking, or when you catch someone staring at you from across the street. That gut instinct that tells you something isn't right? Well, I wish I had listened to mine 3 weeks ago when I first saw that book. I'm telling you this story because what happened to me is something I can't explain, something that shouldn't be possible, and honestly, something I'm still trying to wrap my head around. By the end of this video, you'll understand why I haven't been sleeping much lately and why I keep checking over my shoulder everywhere I go. But first, let me give you some context about what led to this whole nightmare. I've always been fascinated by local history. Not the boring stuff they teach you in school, but the weird, forgotten stories that most people never hear about. The kind of stuff that makes you realize your quiet little hometown has some seriously dark secrets buried beneath the surface. 3 weeks ago, I was at this estate sale in my neighborhood. The house belonged to this elderly woman named Mrs. Hartwell, who had lived there for like 60 years. Her family was selling off everything before they put the house on the market. I was browsing through boxes of old books looking for anything interesting when I stumbled across this leather-bound journal tucked away in the bottom of a dusty cardboard box. The cover was unmarked, just plain black leather that felt almost oily to the touch. When I opened it, I expected to find diary entries or maybe family recipes. Instead, what I found made my blood run cold. Page after page of names, dates, and causes of death. But these weren't obituaries or death certificates. This was something else entirely. The handwriting was meticulous, almost obsessive. Each entry followed the same format: full name, age, date of death, and cause of death. Some entries were recent, others dated back decades. I recognized several names from my town. People who had died in car accidents, heart attacks, cancer. The details were eerily accurate, down to the exact time of death and specific circumstances. At first, I thought maybe Mrs. Hartwell had been some kind of genealogist or local historian keeping track of deaths in the community. Maybe she worked at the funeral home or the hospital. But as I kept flipping through the pages, I found something that made me question everything. There, about halfway through the book, was my neighbor, Mr. Peterson. The entry read, Robert Peterson, age 67, March 15, 2024, 3:47 a.m., cardiac arrest in bedroom. I knew Mr. Peterson had died of a heart attack last month, but seeing it written in this book with such precise detail felt wrong somehow. The timestamp, the location, everything was exactly right. But that's not the part that made me buy the book for $5 and take it home. No, what made me do that was what I found on one of the last pages with writing. My hands were actually shaking as I read it, and I had to read it 3 times before it really sank in. There was my name, my full name, written in that same careful handwriting. And next to it was my age, which was correct. But the date listed was 2 weeks from that day. 2 weeks in the future. The cause of death was listed as vehicular accident, 11:23 p.m. intersection of Maple and 3rd Street. I'm not someone who believes in supernatural stuff. I mean, I watch horror movies and read creepy stories online, but I've always been pretty skeptical about paranormal claims. There had to be a logical explanation. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe someone with my same name had died and would die in the future. Maybe Mrs. Hartwell was just crazy and wrote down random names and dates, but deep down something told me this wasn't random. The way my stomach dropped when I saw my name, the way the hair on my arm stood up, the way I couldn't stop thinking about it for the rest of that day. My body was telling me something my brain didn't want to accept. When I got home, I did what any normal person would do. I went online and started researching. I looked up Mrs. Hartwell's obituary, trying to find out more about her background. Turns out she had worked as a night shift nurse at the local hospital for over 30 years before retiring. That would explain how she had access to so much detailed information about people's deaths. But it still didn't explain the future dates, and it definitely didn't explain why my name was in there. I spent the next few days obsessing over this book. I cross-referenced names with obituaries I found online. Every single entry I could verify was completely accurate. Not just the basic information, but the tiny details that wouldn't normally be public knowledge. The exact time of death, specific locations, even details about final moments that only family members or medical staff would know. The accuracy was unsettling, but what really freaked me out was when I found 3 more entries with future dates. 3 other people in my town, all with death dates ranging from 1 week to 3 months from now. I didn't recognize the names, but I wrote them down anyway. That's when I made my first mistake. I decided to try to find these people. The first name on my list was Sarah Chen, listed to die in a house fire on October 8th. It took me about an hour of online searching to find her address. She lived about 10 minutes from me in a small apartment complex downtown. I know how this sounds, but I had to know if this book was somehow predicting the future or if it was all just an elaborate coincidence. I drove to her apartment building and sat in my car for 20 minutes trying to work up the courage to knock on her door. What was I supposed to say? "Hi, I found your name in a creepy death book and wanted to warn you that you're going to die in a house fire next week." She'd think I was insane. Hell, I was starting to think I was insane. Eventually, I chickened out and went home. But I couldn't stop thinking about Sarah Chen and that fire date. If the book was wrong, then I was just some guy with an overactive imagination who had gotten spooked by a coincidence. But if it was right and I did nothing, then I was potentially letting someone die when I could have prevented it. The next few days were torture. I kept checking the local news, waiting to see if anything had happened to Sarah Chen. I drove by her apartment building twice just to make sure it was still standing. I even considered calling in an anonymous tip to the fire department, but what would I say? That a mysterious book told me there was going to be a fire? October 8th came and went without incident. No house fire, no Sarah Chen in the obituaries. I felt relieved and stupid at the same time. Maybe the book was just the ramblings of a lonely old woman with too much time on her hands. Maybe I had been worrying about nothing. But then October 9th happened and everything changed. I was eating breakfast when my phone buzzed with a news alert. Local woman dies in apartment fire. My hands were shaking as I clicked on the article. Sarah Chen, age 34, had died in a fire at her apartment complex. The fire had started around midnight on October 8th, but she wasn't discovered until the morning of October 9th. The book had been right, just one day off, but right about everything else. The person, the cause of death, even the general time frame. And that meant the other entries were probably accurate too. That meant my entry was probably accurate too. According to the book, I had exactly 5 days left to live. I wish I could tell you that I handled this revelation calmly and rationally. I wish I could say that I took a step back, analyzed the situation logically, and came up with a reasonable plan. But that's not what happened at all. Instead, I completely lost it. The next morning, I called in sick to work. I couldn't focus on anything except that date circled in red on my calendar. 5 days. According to that book, I had 5 days before I'd be involved in a fatal car accident at the intersection of Maple and 3rd Street at 11:23 p.m. My first instinct was simple. Avoid that intersection completely. Easy enough, right? Maple and 3rd was only about a mile from my house, and I could easily take alternate routes anywhere I needed to go. Problem solved. But as the day went on, I realized it wasn't going to be that simple. What if I was a passenger in someone else's car? What if there was an emergency and I had to go through that intersection? What if avoiding it somehow caused the very accident I was trying to prevent? I started researching everything I could about fate, destiny, and whether the future could be changed. Most of what I found was either religious speculation or science fiction nonsense. But I did come across some interesting stories about people who claimed to have cheated death after receiving warnings. The problem was, for every story about someone who successfully avoided their predicted death, there were 3 more about people who died anyway, despite their best efforts to change their fate. It seemed like the universe had a way of course-correcting, making sure things happened the way they were supposed to happen. By day 3, I was barely sleeping. Every time I closed my eyes, I pictured that intersection. I imagined different scenarios: getting hit by a drunk driver, my brakes failing as I approached a red light, someone running a stop sign and T-boning my car. The possibilities were endless, and each one felt more real than the last. That's when I decided to take more drastic action. I called my sister Emma, who lives about 3 hours away, and asked if I could come stay with her for a few days. I didn't tell her about the book or the prediction. I just said I needed a change of scenery and some time to clear my head. She agreed immediately, probably thinking I was going through some kind of midlife crisis. The plan was simple. Get as far away from that intersection as possible and stay away until after the predicted time of death had passed. If I wasn't even in town on that date, there was no way the accident could happen, right? I packed a bag and left town that afternoon. For the first time in days, I actually felt like I could breathe normally. The farther I drove from home, the more convinced I became that I had outsmarted whatever force was behind that book. Emma's house is in a small college town where nothing exciting ever happens. We spent the evening catching up, watching movies, and eating way too much takeout Chinese food. I almost forgot about the book entirely. For a few hours, I felt like my old self again. But then midnight approached, and I couldn't help but check the time obsessively. 11:20 p.m., 11:21 p.m., 11:22 p.m. I was sitting on Emma's couch 3 hours away from that intersection, completely safe. 11:23 p.m. came and went without incident. I actually laughed out loud with relief. I had done it. I had cheated death, outsmarted fate, whatever you want to call it. The book was wrong, or at least incomplete. Maybe it could predict what would happen under normal circumstances, but it couldn't account for people actively trying to change their fate. I slept better that night than I had in weeks. The next morning I was feeling so confident that I decided to drive back home. The danger had passed, the prediction had failed, and life could go back to normal. I even stopped at a gas station and bought a lottery ticket, feeling like I was on some kind of lucky streak. But as I was pulling out of the gas station parking lot, my phone rang. It was my neighbor, Mrs. Rodriguez. "I'm so sorry to bother you," she said, "but I have some terrible news. There was an accident last night at Maple and 3rd Street. A young woman was killed. The police said she was driving a car registered to your address." My blood turned to ice. "What do you mean, registered to my address?" "The victim's name was Sarah Chen. The police found some mail in the car with your address on it. They're trying to reach you to ask about it." Sarah Chen. The same Sarah Chen from the book. The same Sarah Chen who was supposed to die in a house fire but died one day late instead. And somehow she had been driving my car. I hung up and immediately called the police. It took about an hour to sort everything out, but here's what had happened. While I was out of town, someone had broken into my house and stolen my car. That someone was Sarah Chen, who had apparently been struggling with addiction and was looking for things to steal to support her habit. She had taken my car and was driving it when she ran a red light at the intersection of Maple and 3rd Street at exactly 11:23 p.m. A delivery truck hit the driver's side door and she was killed instantly. The book hadn't been wrong about the time, the place, or even the cause of death. It had just been wrong about who would be behind the wheel. But that still didn't explain how Sarah Chen's death had been predicted twice in the same book, with 2 different causes and dates. Unless I drove home as fast as I could and went straight to the book. I flipped to Sarah's original entry about the house fire. The ink looked different somehow, faded like it was old. But when I found the new entry, the one about the car accident, the ink looked fresh and dark. Someone had been updating the book. I checked the page with my name on it, and my heart nearly stopped. The original entry was still there, but it had been crossed out with a single thin line. Below it, in that same meticulous handwriting, was a new entry. Vehicular accident, October 15th, 2024. 7:45 p.m., Highway 92. That was tomorrow, and Highway 92 was the route I would have to take to get back to Emma's house. I slammed the book shut and ran to my car, but as I was backing out of my driveway, I saw something that made me hit the brakes so hard I nearly gave myself whiplash. There was someone sitting in Mrs. Hartwell's old house. Someone was watching me from the upstairs window. The house was supposed to be empty. The family had finished cleaning it out weeks ago, and it wasn't supposed to go on the market until next month. But I could clearly see a figure silhouetted against the window, and they were definitely looking in my direction. I sat in my car for what felt like forever, staring at that window. The figure never moved, never turned away. They just watched me with impatience that felt almost inhuman. Finally, I worked up the courage to get out of my car and walk across the street. I had to know who was in that house and how they were connected to the book. The front door was locked, but I remembered seeing an estate sale sign saying to use the back entrance. The back door was unlocked. I called out "hello" as I stepped inside but got no response. The house was completely empty except for a card table set up in the middle of the living room. On the table was the book I had just left in my own house, open to the page with my name on it. But that was impossible. I had left the book at home just 5 minutes ago. I heard footsteps on the stairs and looked up to see an elderly man walking down toward me. He looked to be in his 70s, thin and frail, but his eyes were sharp and alert. He was wearing a simple brown cardigan and carrying a pen in his right hand. "You're early," he said, like he had been expecting me. But I suppose that makes sense given the circumstances. "Who are you?" I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. "My name is Harold Hartwell. I was married to the woman who used to live in this house. I'm the one who's been keeping the records." He walked over to the table and sat down in one of the 2 folding chairs. He gestured for me to sit in the other one. "I know you have questions," he said, "and I'll answer them as best I can. But first, I need you to understand something important. The book doesn't predict deaths. It records them. All of them. Past, present, and future. Time isn't as linear as most people think it is." I sat down across from him, my hand shaking slightly. "So you're saying you can see the future?" "Not exactly. I can see all of time at once, like looking at a map instead of driving down a road. Your death, Sarah Chen's death, everyone's death, they've already happened from a certain perspective. I'm just writing down what I observe." "Then why did Sarah's death change? Why was my death changed?" Harold smiled sadly. "Because people have free will, even within the constraints of fate. When you tried to avoid your original death, you created what we call a temporal ripple. Sarah ended up in your place, quite literally. But the universe tends to course correct. You were supposed to die that night, so it found another way to arrange it. So no matter what I do, I'm going to die tomorrow. Most likely, yes, though I'll admit you've been more resourceful than most. Usually when someone finds the book, they die within a few days of their original date. You've managed to push it back by almost a week." I stared at the book on the table, open to my page with its crossed-out entry and new prediction. "What happens if I just don't drive on Highway 92 tomorrow? Then you'll die some other way at some other time. But it will happen soon. The universe doesn't like loose ends." We sat in silence for several minutes. Finally, I asked the question that had been bothering me since I walked into the house. "Why are you telling me this? Why not just let it happen?" Harold looked out the window at the setting sun. "Because 43 years ago, I found my wife's name in this book. She was supposed to die in a car accident on our anniversary. I tried everything to save her. I hid her car keys. I convinced her to stay home. I even had her admitted to the hospital for fake symptoms. But she died anyway, in that same hospital from a reaction to medication they gave her." He turned back to me and I could see tears in his eyes. The difference is nobody warned me what would happen. Nobody explained the rules. I've been keeping these records ever since. hoping that someday I could help someone understand what they're up against. You're the first person to actually find the book and seek me out. So what are you saying? That I should just accept it and die? I'm saying you should make peace with it. Spend tomorrow doing things that matter to you. Call people you love. Make sure your affairs are in order. Don't spend your last day running from something you can't escape. I left Harold's house feeling strangely calm. For the first time since I'd found the book, I wasn't trying to figure out how to cheat death. Instead, I was thinking about how to make the most of the time I had left. I called Emma and told her I loved her. I called my parents and had the best conversation we'd had in years. I wrote emails to old friends, ate my favorite meal, and watched the sunset from my back porch. But I'm still here. It's been 3 days since my supposed death date, and nothing has happened. No accidents, no mysterious illnesses, nothing. Maybe Harold was wrong. Maybe the universe doesn't always course correct. Or maybe by accepting my fate instead of fighting it, I somehow broke the cycle. I still have the book. Every few days I check to see if there are new entries, new dates. Sometimes there are. But my name hasn't appeared again, and I'm starting to think it never will. The thing is, I can't shake the feeling that I'm living on borrowed time. Every day feels like a gift, but also like it might be my last. I keep expecting to turn a corner and find Harold waiting for me with his pen and that patient smile. Maybe that's not such a bad way to live, though. Maybe we're all living on borrowed time and most of us just don't realize it. I never did find out what happened to Harold Hartwell or why he had the ability to see death the way he did. His house sold last month and the new owners said they never found any books or records inside. But sometimes late at night I drive by that intersection at Maple and 3rd Street and I think about Sarah Chen and the choice she never got to make. I think about all the names in that book, all the people who died without ever knowing it was coming. And I think about how lucky I am to still be here, even if I don't understand why. If you ever find a book like the one I found, my advice is simple. Don't look for your name. Some knowledge isn't worth having, and some futures are better left unknown. But if you do find your name, remember what Harold told me. Make peace with it, and make sure the time you have left actually matters, because in the end, that's all any of us can do.